Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Public Service Leadership Lab, in which we feature mentorship conversations between a leadership luminary and a current federal leader, so they can work through real-life leadership issues and you can benefit from the lessons and insights shared. These conversations are part of Public Service Leadership Week, hosted by the Public Service Leadership Institute, during which we highlight the importance of developing effective government leadership and feature real leaders who are making an impact. My name is Kelly Shee, and I will be your moderator for this week. I lead strategy here at the Public Service Leadership Institute, which is housed in the Partnership for Public Service, a nonpartisan nonprofit working to build a better government and stronger democracy. Our institute is the premier source for public service leadership programs, policies, and perspectives. We bring 2 decades of experience in federal leadership to training nearly 10,000 leaders a year using the framework of our public service leadership model, the standard for effective government leadership. So each one of these mentorship conversations will focus on different values and competencies of the model. And today we are focused on the core values of the public service leadership model, which really differentiate leading in government. Those values are the stewardship of public trust and the commitment to public good. These values are derived from the oath of office that all federal civil servants take upon entering their jobs. So I'm excited to dig into these topics with 2 amazing leaders. Our leadership luminary for today is Stephen M.R. Covey, the global speed of trust practice leader at FranklinCovey and best-selling author of 2 wonderful leadership books that you might be able to see up here if you squint really hard, The Speed of Trust and Trust and Inspire. He also serves on our Government Leadership Advisory Council, where he lends his leadership expertise to our federal context and helped develop the public service leadership model. Hi, Stephen. Thank you so much for being here today.
Hey, it's wonderful to be with you, Kelly. Thank you so much. I'm really honored.
Wonderful. And our current federal leader is James Trudeau, a lead procurement analyst at the First Responder Network Authority, or FirstNet, at the Department of Commerce. FirstNet is our nation's communications network dedicated to emergency responders and the public safety community. James is also an alum of our Excellence in Government Fellows program. Hi, James. Thank you so much for your service and for joining us today.
Hi, Kelly. Good to be here. Thank you.
So, James, I will start with you. As we dig into our topic of today around values, one of the most important parts of being a leader is understanding and staying aligned to your values, even in complex environments and times. So can you share with us more about how you align your work to the values of public service and maybe any challenges you've faced in doing so?
Sure. So it's interesting because I am the type of person that prescribes to the KISS method. And when I say KISS, I mean KISS J, because it's keep it simple, James, instead of keep it simple, other obvious words, right? And so I try to simplify things instead of making things complex, right? And that's easier for me to digest, and it's usually easier to implement. And so what I mean by that is I think about values not as personal versus professional values, but I think of them just values in general. I think in my experience, we get in trouble when we try to be one person at home and in our normal lives versus another person in our work lives, and putting on these different hats and trying to adjust what we bring to the table when we're trying to do that. So like I said, I keep it simple, and I try to have the same values that I have at home, and I try to take those with me to work. And some of those things is first and foremost is I'm a family guy. Family first is my first priority, and I encourage everybody that I work with to take that and to be that, and to have a relationship-oriented focus, which is kind of faux pas in a lot of ways. A lot of people would say, well, you're here to do a job, and I would argue, in my experience and opinion, would be, yes, I'm better at doing that job if I'm taking care of and prioritizing my family. And part of that for us as a family is having open communication and honest communication. Again, something that's easily transferable into the workspace, but it's beneficial in both. And the last piece of my personal values that also, again, bleed over into work would be time, and the priority of time and the finiteness of time. And so I try to take all those things into consideration. And if I do those 3 things, again, keep it simple, James, I feel like I'm prepared to tackle even the most complex environments. And so I think about that, and one of the biggest challenges I have with that, and I'd love to hear Stephen's thoughts, is the folks that don't have that same mentality, right? Because a lot of times in the government and in the private sector, there's this thought of mission first, maybe people always. I've heard that in the DoD, or results-driven organizations, and that's how they gauge success. And so there's been times as a leader when I've been confronted with that type of leadership style as opposed to mine, right, which is more relationship focused. And they don't always jive together, right? I've had leaders that have said, yes, I care about the people. I care about what's going on with the people that work for me because they ultimately help me meet the mission and deliver results. But then when it comes down to it, it seems as if results are the number one priority. So I struggle with that sometimes, and I try to figure out how to reconcile that.
Yeah. Well, James, first of all, it's great to be with you, and I appreciate hearing about your personal values. And you're right. Sometimes, you might approach this of who you are going into a situation, but then you're working with other people that may have different values or different hierarchy of them, or they might have some common values, but maybe when the pressure's on, it gets manifest in a different way. And in a sense, that's a challenge for all of us, where sometimes our style might be getting in the way of our intent, because most leaders wouldn't say, look, I don't care about the people, I just want the results. Most leaders would say, yes, I want to get results, and I do care about the people. But oftentimes, though, how it shows up, especially when the pressure is on, suddenly it might revert to, gosh, it looks like 100% of the focus is only on the result. And maybe there was just lip service to the people. So sometimes our style can get in the way of our intent. And that's true for all of us. So I would just say this, that the more that, again, trying to be consistent with your values as you're working with maybe people that have different values or different approaches, the more that you can kind of frame what's important to them around doing it in a way that's also aligned with what you believe, and show how ultimately it's not either or. Right. Ultimately, it's truly and, because work is done with and through people. And so results are achieved with and through people. And if the focus is solely on results to the detriment of the people, over time, our ability to get results will have just gone down, because the people won't be growing and developing. You'll lose trust in the culture. They won't be as creative and innovative, and we can't respond as fast or as thoughtfully and capably, and the results will go down. And so if the results is the outcome that we want, and I think everyone wants to get results, if we can try to elevate, we're not trying to take down the creation of results. Instead, we're just trying to elevate that. Also, we want to grow people and develop people and build trust and build a culture. Then our ability to get results in the future will have just gone up. So I find that I kind of try to meet people where they're at. If someone says, I'm really focused on results, I say, I am too. They matter. And if we're not getting results, it's not going to work. And I've learned that if we can get results in a way that inspires trust, in a way that grows people, that then our ability to get results in the future has just gone up. And isn't that what we want? More capacity, more ability. And so it's very easy to kind of fall into dichotomies of either or. What is it? Is it the results, or is it the relationships? It's actually, we want both. And we're not going to take down the importance of results at all. We're just going to elevate the importance of the relationships of the people and the culture, both as an independent value in and of itself, that matters for all the right reasons, but also that in the long run, that's also a better way of even achieving the results that you want. So it becomes this virtuous upward cycle that's actually connected. And I find that a little bit more effective than kind of going in and say, well, you're focusing on results, I'm focusing on people. Instead, meet people where they're at and show how ultimately it's probably an and approach to achieving what they want. And that will bring you into it, and then you can be authentic, have integrity to your values, but also you're trying to be effective and real and meet people where they're at so that you can have influence on them. You can understand them, and maybe together you create something that's even better than you might have on your own.
Sure.
Well, Stephen, I'm not surprised, but very glad that you brought up trust in there. And just sounds like that framework that you shared around the and is a really great way of contributing to building trust in a relationship too. So I want to ask you a little bit more of that, as stewardship of public trust is one of the values in our model. Can you share with us a formative leadership experience you have around building trust and some of the lessons you took from that you'd want to share with James and everyone listening today?
Yes, absolutely. So I'm going to make a long story short. So a transformative experience on this for me was when I was in the private sector. I was the CEO of Covey Leadership Center, and a leadership development training company. And we ended up merging our company with Franklin Quest, which was in the time management business, and we overlapped a little bit. In fact, we overlapped a lot. And so these two companies coming together to form FranklinCovey in a merger. And the merger made all the sense in the world on paper. Good people, good values, good mission, etc. But suddenly, when we merged this together, there was low trust. And the reason for that was that we had been arch competitors for years and competing against each other. We had completely different approaches and methodologies of how to do it. And so while on paper the merger made sense, when it was combined, suddenly there was just distrust of each party coming together. And even though great people on both sides and such, we were kind of divided down party lines, if you will. We've seen this, right? And that was happening. And there was a high cost of low trust. We became oriented and focused instead of focusing on the marketplace and serving needs. We began to question the agenda and the motives of other parties. We began to interpret all the behaviors and actions through the lens of who's winning, which side of the merger is winning. And this went on and on and on. And the thing is that here we were, a leadership development company, talking about the importance of leadership, and yet we had, in this merged company, for a while there, we didn't trust each other. It wasn't going to work. We weren't modeling what we were teaching. And it became very clear to me, and by the way, this was even personal with me. I was the CEO of the one company, and now I'm coming in, and half the people don't trust me. And I'd done nothing in particular to lose that trust, but I also just assumed it and took it for granted. I'd not done intentional, deliberate things to build the trust. And kind of there was this inheritance tax, if you will, of just the fact that we were arch competitors, now combined. And so I had to kind of become self-aware that, you know what? We got a trust issue. And our ability to achieve the goal of the merger, to get great results for customers, to be innovative and collaborative, none of that was going to happen unless we could build trust with each other, because everything was slowing down, costing more, and becoming politicized. And so we had to kind of say, you know what? We've got to build trust with each other. And it starts with me. I felt like I had to build trust with everyone there. And so I became intentional about it, deliberate about it, that trust is built really from the inside out. I've got to look in the mirror. I can't point the finger and say, hey, we can build trust around here as soon as you guys change. I had to look in the mirror and say, what do I need to do to give to my new partners a leader who they can trust? And I had to look at myself and become better and become more intentional, more deliberate, and model the behavior that I would like to see. I had to go first in being open and transparent. I had to go first in talking truthfully and in also listening first to others and then demonstrating respect for what I heard versus thinking my way, our way was better than their way. And that was my first instinct was, we got a better approach than you do. And that wasn't leading to synergy. Instead, it was leading to distrust. As soon as I changed it to, let me understand you. Let me listen first. And then rather than judging what I heard, showing respect for what I heard, being influenced by it, suddenly, in turn, they would reciprocate and say, thank you for listening and understanding. How do you do it? And then I'd share my piece, and then together we would have this mutual understanding, and suddenly we started to say, what if we could do something different than either of us was doing separately and do something new together? And we began to behave our way into greater trust. And long story made short is that by being deliberate and intentional about building trust, by behaving our way into greater trust, talking straight, demonstrating respect, being transparent, listening first, keeping commitments, and then extending trust to each other. Because to get trust, you got to give trust. And I had to do all those things, and it had to start with me. And for everyone, it needed to start with them. And as soon as I started doing that, everything changed. And we came out of this, and we went from low trust to high trust. And once we built trust, suddenly we could do everything faster, less cost. We were far more creative, far more innovative, adaptive, responsive, but also it was more fun. We're a lot happier, greater energy, greater joy. And we went from low trust to high trust and changed our trajectory dramatically with different outcomes. And I came away from this whole experience saying, there is a high cost to low trust, and there's a great return to high trust. Also, I said, trust changes everything. And in profound ways, and I just experienced it. I saw the bad side, and I've seen the good side. And most importantly, is that trust can be learned. Trust can be created. Trust can be established and grown if we're deliberate and intentional about it, if we behave our way into it, and if each of us looks in the mirror and says, I'm going to go first. And I had to model that and learn that. And that was humbling. It really was, because initially I was finger pointing, not mean-spiritedly, but kind of just thinking, a little smug of my way's better. And I had to look in the mirror and say, be humble, learn, and behave my way into greater trust. When we did it, changed everything. And I walked away from that whole experience saying, we got to get good at this. Trust matters. And it's movable, it's learnable. And I just experienced it firsthand. So that was a transformative experience for me. And it was from that then I wrote my first book, The Speed of Trust, based upon that experience.
Yeah, it's interesting, Stephen, that as you were telling that story, and it's profound because I think we all have the opportunity, and try to think of things in metaphors. Again, keep it simple, James.
Yeah.
It's almost like two seeds that you have to choose which one's going to grow. Are you going to feed and water and fertilize the seed that produces that trust, right? And looks inside before you look outside, that adjusts internally before trying to adjust things externally? Or do you feed and water or allow the organization as a leader to feed the seed of doubt, to feed the seed of discontent and discourse and division? And I think we all have that opportunity, right, to decide, but you have to actively do it, right? It's not, I think you alluded to it, it's not going to happen passively. You have to make a decision to make that happen.
I love it. You're exactly right, James. There's a great illustration of keep it simple, James. That's beautiful. That's you framed what I was saying, and you did it in 1 minute. I took 5. but that's exactly it. We had to intentionally work on building trust, build the creation of trust. But the tendency was the other direction. It was easier to feed the distrust, to feed the suspicion, because that was all around us. That fed into our fears and our gripes and our complaints about the other party, and it was easy to feed that. And we had to become intentional and deliberate about feeding the other side, which is, you know what? Yes, these are all real issues, but what can we do to build this on purpose? And that changed everything once we learned that.
James, you've got Keep It Simple, James, but I just realized that, Stephen, if you want to use it, you can use KISS because you can keep
I'll
it
try
simple.
it.
James, when Stephen was sharing his story, I was thinking about that. I know you've worked in so many different contexts and so many different environments, and in your active duty service, in your civil service, private sector, all of that. Was there anything that was coming up for you as Stephen was sharing his story around trust, and whether that's sort of within where you're working or how you see that relationship, the partnership, we think about public trust also and how the public interacts with the government. Anything that came up for you and examples or questions that you might have from all those experiences?
Yeah, so I do have, I feel like a lot of experience, a little bit here and a little bit there, maybe a jack of all trades, master of none type of thing. Hopefully I'm a master of something. But I think about a lot of my experiences in the procurement and government contracts field, right? And so there's this inherent ability that's given procurement professionals in the government to spend and to be stewards of taxpayer dollars. And so the taxpayer is, whether they know it or not, most of them are ignorant, not again in a negative way, just they don't know that there's this immense responsibility of people in the government that are charged with spending those dollars. And that could be on construction projects, professional services to supplement what the military or the government already does, or like major weapon systems, right? Rockets and satellites or major airframes, things like that. But there's somebody that has that responsibility in the government, and they don't take it lightly, and it's not given to them lightly either. And so there's this, like I said, immense trust that's given them. And so we carry that with like a badge of honor sometimes, but it's almost not like a braggadocious badge of honor. It's just the government has put this trust in me, and that trust, again, equates to spending those taxpayer dollars. So I think about that, and I think about a time when I was in Afghanistan, like you said, and this was way back in the 2000s. In 2009, 2010, I was in Afghanistan as a contracting officer. And as a contracting officer in the government, you're, again, charged with spending the government's money. And I was attached to a special forces organization in charge of spending money and buying the things that the special forces soldiers need to accomplish their mission. So it was cool because you had a first-hand experience and very a touch point to the mission that was happening and to the end result of, I just bought this thing and I can see it being used immediately, which is completely gratifying. But a part of that process was giving that same authority to special forces soldiers. And the unique thing about that is, right, these special forces soldiers, whether they be Navy SEALs or Green Berets or Marine Special Operation Command Marines, that's not their job. Their job has never been to spend the government's taxpayer dollars. So what we would have to do as contracting professionals was brief them, train them, give them just the basics so that they could go out and do it. Why? Because Afghanistan's obviously a big country. We couldn't be everywhere at the same time. So we would give them backpacks of cash, literally, to go buy the things they needed where we couldn't go at that moment in time to buy those things. And when we did train them up, we would be very explicit because, again, my training as a procurement professional is very in-depth. It takes years to become and get that authority and to have that ability. And we were essentially giving them that ability and that authority at a much lower level, but within an hour. And I would say to them, listen, I know that this is just an additional duty, as we put it in the government sometimes, but this has immense repercussions if you do not take this seriously. I'm putting all of this trust in you. So I'm essentially giving you the trust that's been given to me. I'm giving it to you. I did that for hundreds. Hundreds of Special Forces soldiers had that authority, had that ability. Didn't think anything of it. They would come back and forth to reconcile with me. They would say, here's the purchases I made. Here's the money I spent on those purchases. We would say, check, 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 good to go. Go get yourself some more money. Go out and do great things. Keep doing the things you need to do, right? So that happened. I was in Afghanistan again, 29 to April of 2010. Fast forward to about 2008. I'm sitting in my office working as a civilian. I'd gotten out of the military. I get a phone call, and the phone call says, is this James Trudeau? And I said, yes, of course it is. And they said, oh, is this the James Trudeau that was deployed to Afghanistan from this time to this time? And now I'm thinking, who is this? And I said, yes, it is. And they said, is this James Trudeau that was deployed in support of special forces in Afghanistan from this time and was the lead contracting officer for Special Forces. And again, now I'm like, what is going on and who is this? And I said, yes, can I ask who this is? And they said, this is Special Prosecuting Attorney so-and-so, and I have Special Agent so-and-so on the phone with me. And my stomach sunk, because I know that I had never done anything that I should not have done, but you still get into this place of like, man, have I broken somebody's trust? Have I done something I wasn't supposed to do? In the famous words of Stephen M.R. Covey, to make a long story short, unfortunately, some of these Special Forces soldiers had taken that trust that I had given them and incorrectly used it and essentially stole some of that money that was tagged, obviously, to be spent for the mission in Afghanistan, and had taken that money and essentially stolen. And the government, rightfully so, found out X number of years later, and I was being asked to testify in federal court about this thing. And I can just remember all these flashbacks that happened, right? Obviously, war is war, but it was really more about like, man, I gave that trust to these guys. I expected they would take it as seriously as I did. Why? Because I expressed to them the severity and the importance of it all. And it was almost, again, a punch in the gut, not of like, man, I failed, but is there something more I could have done to make that not happen as a leader, right? Is there something I could have done to communicate better the trust that I was giving them, but the trust that the public expected from them, again, in a small role, but exponentially, if you obviously look at economies of scale, something that could be obviously very, very bad, right? And so that's one of the things I think about when I think of trust, and how that broke the trust for me, right, personally, but also that's the type of stuff that the American public sees, right? And then they say, there's that one bad apple. And in my experience, the people don't focus, and people in general, right, the big P people, don't focus on the 99 great things you do. A lot of times it's on the one bad thing that has happened. And sometimes it's an honest mistake, right? And sometimes we get looked down upon because of that one mistake, but sometimes it's a malicious thing as well, like this example. So I just think about that, Stephen, and I think about it, if you have any thoughts about how do you not let that discourage you, right? How do you not let the one drive your motivations and fears and prevent you from taking risks, and you focus somewhat on the more 99 wins, and so that we can, not get bogged down, right?
Yeah, and you framed it beautifully, James, and what a story, and the impact of that is, very significant, because to have that kind of public trust violated, and it was something that you had been a part of extending with the expectation of, let's honor this public trust, and have it be violated, that is a hard thing. It does impact all of us when something like that happens. And I think that you've framed it right, though, that most people within public service, within the government, in the military, in private business, most people want to do good. There are a few bad actors. It always happens. But most want to do good. And sometimes people fall short. It's one thing when we fall short on the competence side. Mm-hmm. It's another thing when we fall short on the character side. Because ultimately, trust is built through both character and competence. Character and competence. We can work with some shortcomings on the competence side more. People develop more skills, and you want to make sure that when you extend trust to people, that they're prepared for it, they're ready for it, and they've got the skills for it. And that's the competence side of it. The character side is a little bit harder. That's where it really hurts, when someone demonstrates a lack of integrity, or a complete breach of integrity in a case like this, or where their intent is not to serve the public good, but to be self-serving. That's tougher to overcome. But you said it. I think it's important as leaders that we don't allow the 1%, or maybe it's 2 or 3% of the people who we can't trust to define the 97% plus who we can. Most people want to be trusted and will live up to it. most people will become inspired by it, especially if we focus on the expectations and the accountability to the trust being given. So it's not a blind trust of just, hey, I trust you with this, do whatever you think. It's, here's expectations, here's accountability around the trust being given. So there's a sense of stewardship to the trust being given, and they kind of sense that, then the odds of them kind of wanting to live true to that go up. And most people will live true to it, but a few might abuse it. And it'd be very easy to kind of swing the pendulum to the other side and say, hey, I've been burned, you can't trust anybody. The problem with that is nothing would happen if we couldn't trust anybody. We wouldn't get anything done. And because you'd only go as far as you individually could do. We have to work together. We have to be both trustworthy and trusting as leaders to create this trust. And so don't let the few who you can't trust define the many who you can. And, same thing true in life, in relationships. People could be in a relationship and maybe someone betrays the person. And it'd be very easy to say, I can never trust another person again. I can never have a relationship again because I've been betrayed. That is a risk. But then we would lose out on so much of life, of the beauty and the possibilities that come from rich, trusting relationships if we were not willing to extend that trust. So I like to say, don't let the few who you can't trust define the many who you can. Leadership, we gotta look forward, but then we try to minimize the few by really focusing on, when we extend the trust, on clarifying expectations around the trust being given and agreeing to a process of accountability to the trust being given. So there's a sense of a stewardship. And I have a sense of stewardship around this trust that James has given me. And the stronger you can make that sense of stewardship, the more apt they are, the more likely they are to keep it, to be true to it, to live up to it and such, and the less likely they would be to violate it. It still could happen. But I think that's where we've got to kind of balance all things considered. And we design things to make sure that the offenders, the violators, we ultimately want them to leave, to be out. We want to build a culture that will weed out, starve out, crowd out the violators, the offenders. And that's, I think, a stronger way of doing it than just with more rules, more regulations, or just saying we're never going to trust anybody again because we've been burned. That's part of life. It's a good lesson. Instead, say it puts a greater premium on making sure we are intentional and deliberate about extending trust, how we do it, that we build a stewardship around it, and a stewardship agreement with expectations and accountability around the trust being given. So we set people up to win and to be true to it. And that's a good balancing act. But you described kind of the dark side of trusting and being wrong. But if you took it away, that we couldn't trust anyone, there's a dark side to that too. Nothing would happen. And so we're balancing this. What's the balance? Stewardship and stewardship agreements as a way to be smart about it, but still being able to empower and trust people. Make sense?
Great. Yeah, exactly. Thank you.
James, I'm so appreciative that you shared that story with us. And I know from both that story and the other work that you've done, there's this thread of service that goes through your career. And really this stewardship and the how comes out, and you explained it beautifully in the work of procurement and the work of being stewards of taxpayer dollars. And then you've done it in these different contexts of different missions, and now you're at FirstNet. So I would love for you to just talk a little bit more about how you think about the mission of your work and that commitment to the public good in whatever role that you're in, that you're serving, how you think that plays into the way that you lead, the way that you see your colleagues and other civil servants doing their work. Would love to hear more about what you do and how you think that ties in.
Sure. So as you mentioned earlier, I work at the First Responder Network Authority, better known as FirstNet or FirstNet Authority. FirstNet Authority established a communication network that's built for public safety, and the unique thing about it is it's by public safety professionals, which are obviously first responders. And because of that, our civil servants have the unique opportunity that we work with in our agency. FirstNet's a small independent agency under the Department of Commerce. Most people haven't even heard of it. And when I tell people FirstNet, they think AT&T, so they think private sector. So part of that is just informing them of what we do. But our civil servants, again, have a unique opportunity, and I would say a desire, because they work directly with public safety professionals. We get that face-to-face, that one-on-one opportunity with the stakeholder that we get to procure things for. And so that's a great thing because we have that direct tie. I know not everybody has that, right? They have to find a way to equate what they do to how does that affect the public good and being committed to the public good. We at the FirstNet Authority get to see that almost daily, whether it be with our work or when you go outside and you see first responders in your local community, right? But as procurement professionals, we're committed to making sure that every dollar we spend at the FirstNet is in support of public safety, and it's done appropriately and it obtains the best value. And best value is like a term of art in the government procurement world, and it means for us that what we provide gives the greatest overall benefit in response to what the public safety community requires, right? We're meeting that community's requirements in the best way that we can. Sometimes that does mean buying the thing that is the cheapest, right? And sometimes that means not buying the things that's the cheapest. Just like in our personal worlds, we know that sometimes you have to pay more for a quality product or a quality service. The cheapest service or the cheapest product is not always the best way we want to go. And sometimes that's a balancing act, right? And I think there is some consternation within the American public when they think about that the government should buy what's the cheapest. But then you flip it on the head again. You go back to, in your own personal world, would you buy the cheapest bathroom remodeling? Probably not, unless that person or that company had a record of giving the greatest quality as well. So the unique thing about our civil servants in FirstNet is I've had an opportunity to work with them, and again, at different agencies, at the VA, at the Patent and Trademark Office, with the Air Force and the Space Force, and all of the procurement professionals that I've worked with understand that there's this huge responsibility with being taxed and being stewards of the taxpayer dollars. We approach our work knowing that what we do matters to the public safety community, and in turn, and ultimately this is the best thing and the point for us at FirstNet Authority. It helps them save lives and keep communities safe across the country. So I think a civil servant's biggest challenge for us at FirstNet, and what I've seen across my 2+ decades of federal service, is keeping that thought process at the forefront of our minds. It's super easy, right? When we are new, you first take that oath to think about that thing, or even when big wins happen. You award a contract and it helps out first responders immediately. You have this self-worth and sense of, man, I did it, I'm helping. But I'm curious, Stephen, if there's strategies for us in general that people can use, because a lot of times we get wrapped up, right, in the day-to-day functions, and we lose sight of the difference that we're making because you don't see it every day, right? You don't raise that hand every day to say, I take an oath to serve and defend the Constitution, right? And so I'm curious if you have strategies that can fill in the blanks, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, I think that I kind of, this is where I find having a model or a framework around kind of the work that we're doing, the leadership that we're providing, and in public service, and you know what you're doing. If you kind of return to, in a sense, it's almost where Kelly started this discussion, returning to your values. And just like you do, you have your personal values, but you also have values as a public servant. And that's what's beautiful about this public service leadership model, is that it starts with core values that are distinctive and unique to being a public servant. And in a sense, we always come back to our core values. It's like a true north for us. And we remind ourselves of it. We reflect upon them. It's not kind of like a one and done. Yeah, I heard it, I got it, and then we just move forward. We're coming back to it time and again. It's like the Constitution for us. Personally, I'm a steward. You know, I have the stewardship of the public trust, and I have a commitment to the public good. And those are our distinctive values that we have as public servants. And rather than hearing it one time in a workshop it becomes a compass. It becomes part of who we are and how we lead and how we serve. And so we remind ourselves of it. Stewardship of the public trust, commitment to the public good. And even that word stewardship is a big word, because I believe that ultimately leadership is stewardship. It's about responsibility, not rights, influence, not position. And so this is a responsibility we have. I like to also say a stewardship is a job with a trust. And as public servants, we have a job with a trust to keep the public trust, to earn the public trust, and even to grow the public trust, and to do our very best to never violate the public trust. Like the example you gave earlier, you violate that. That has huge consequences. And so just kind of reminding ourselves, coming back to that, seeing that as part of who we are, just like I would kind of, for me personally, come back to my personal values to make sure I'm in alignment, I have integrity. I come back to my public service values to make sure I have alignment and integrity to those. And that's an ongoing thing. And, where, every week as I plan my week, I try to come back to my personal values. I do a similar thing about, I'm going to come back to the values that we have as a public servant leader. And those being so foundational. It's almost like two bongo drums, just boom, 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 boom. Stewardship of the public trust, commitment to the public good, boom, boom, boom. And just coming back to it time and again and never straying from it and using the language. And it just helps remind us all so we don't stray too far away from it. And we need those reminders. And it's very easy to start become self-serving. I think of, stewardship commitment to the public good. And that's the idea that we put service above self-interest. And if we ever start to slip on that and put self-interest above service, then the risk is not only will we violate that stewardship, we'll also violate the first stewardship of the public trust. And so these are integrated. They're like two sides of the same coin, and they work together beautifully. And I think we need to view them as an ongoing compass that is not a one-time thing that we learned, but it's an ongoing compass as we use going forward and navigating our work. And then I also think the more we can help each other build this kind of culture, so this becomes ingrained in the culture, then that becomes a reinforcer of those core values. And then when there's a strong culture that is embodying the stewardship of the public trust and the commitment to the public good, that culture helps keep us aligned with that, but also it will tend to weed out and spit out violators and offenders of that. And that's a better way of doing it than trying to come down with a whole bunch of new rules and regulations on people, which is kind of the easier way to do. You can mandate that, you can legislate that with a stroke of the pen, but you want to really build the culture, which is much stronger in doing that.
Yeah, that's really good. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Stephen, I wanted to ask, you've done such a beautiful job of tying together the values as well. And we know that public trust is something that has unfortunately been declining over time for various reasons. This is some research that the partnership does. And part of our research is understanding that sometimes, people mean different things when they think about trust and trust in government. What do they mean by government? James alluded to this also. One of the things we found is if we share stories with them, and I know you came to our Service to America medals or Sammy's Gala a few years ago that showcased these amazing stories of public servants doing amazing things like James has done in his career also, that really makes a difference for people. That if you ask them afterwards if they trust government, they're more likely to increase in their answer. And so we know that this is something, but it's something that's hard to replicate at scale. And it can be a discouraging, can be sometimes a hard environment for public servants to operate in. So I just wanted to turn over to you to talk a little bit more about, as public service leaders, sort of the role of their commitment to public good and the work that they do in continuing to build public trust in government, maybe any encouragement you might have for them as they continue to go through these complex times.
Yes, and I appreciate the way you asked that question, Kelly, including that it's very easy to kind of use as an example a violator and an offender, and those stories tend to get told 100 times more, maybe 1,000 times more, because they stand out. It's like your experience that you had, James. You have experience like that, and suddenly that just sinks you, and that gets told and retold. But there's so many stories on the other side that need to be told, that need to be seen, need to be recognized, where we see extraordinary leaders within public, within various government agencies and departments and organizations that are modeling beautifully these core values of stewardship of the public trust, commitment to the public good. And they are demonstrating both character and competence. When I walked away from attending a Sammy's event like you were referencing, Kelly, I was overwhelmed by the extraordinary leaders that I had just witnessed and seen and heard their stories of, that demonstrated both character and competence, both of which built a greater sense of stewardship of the public trust, because they were building trust with the public by being so good at what they were doing, but also seeing their undeniable commitment to the public good, that it was putting service above self-interest. And, because if anything turns us off, it's when someone does the opposite and puts themselves above serving. And I walked away saying, we need these stories. People need these examples, and they're out there. They're everywhere, but we need to see them, and we need to recognize them, and we need to tell them, and we need to learn from them, and we need to be models who can become mentors. And that's why I admire James and his service in so many different roles and responsibilities, modeling character and competence, modeling a stewardship to the public trust, modeling a commitment to the public good. And then to see agencies doing that. I'll never forget a time I was with Admiral William McRaven, former commander of Special Forces, four-star extraordinary leader. And I met with him and his team, and I spent time. And here he is, this commander of Special Ops, and so elite fighting forces, best of the best. They're the work that they do together as a team is all built on trust with each other. How they do it. Here they were already in what they do, best in the world at trust. And yet Admiral McRaven was having me come in and work with him and them on getting even better at what they were already best in the world at. And I looked at that and I said, this is remarkable that here you have these high trust teams. It doesn't work without extraordinary trust in these teams in Special Ops. They're already the best in the world at trust, and they're trying to get better. And just such a learning of we could all learn from this, that the people that are already the best are trying to get better because they have an ongoing learning ethic and a growth ethic, growth mindset of getting better, being true to the stewardship that they have, and getting better. And it was modeled by Admiral McRaven, extraordinary humility and simultaneously extraordinary courage at the same time. Empathy combined with performance at the same time. Authenticity, vulnerability at the same time. It's remarkable. And I said, there's leaders like this everywhere. Mm-hmm. And we need to recognize them. We need to see them. We need models, and models can become mentors, and we can really ripple this out. And so I want to give encouragement and hope and that this is what we need in our country today. It's what we need in our government. It's what we need in our agencies. Models of living these core values, of being great stewards of the public trust, growing that public trust because they have a sense of stewardship, of responsibility. Models of people truly and deeply committed to the public good. The noblest intent is the public good. And when people feel that and see that and experience that with you, your commitment to the public good, and especially over self-interest, that builds trust, but also it elevates, you increase the goodwill of the public good. Mm-hmm. And then that can become contagious of this is how we do it here. This is how we lead. We're models who can become mentors. We get enough of that going on. Enough of people like James doing what he does so well, and others what they do so well. We will begin to ripple out and turn this into our greatest strength and begin to rebuild, restore, reestablish the trust that we have in our society. We need this in our world today. It's a low trust world all around us. Seriously, it's not just in the U.S., it's a low trust world. And we need to counteract it by saying there are models and examples of high trust leaders right here in public service, and they're everywhere. They're all around us. And we can learn from them. We can be mentored by them, and we can become them ourselves to help bring about this renaissance of trust that we need in our society today.
And how lucky are we that we have two of them right here on this call. This has been an amazing, wide-ranging conversation. We've talked about trust and in a smaller scale between people at this larger scale. James, I wanted to turn it over to you and ask you what maybe one of your main takeaways or something you're going to take back to your own leadership from this conversation today.
Sure. So it was something that Stephen said early on, and I think it hit me really profoundly that and I think my default is this us versus them. And I think that's the majority of people, right? Is this us versus them, my way or their way. It's very divisive. It's very like a dichotomy, like you said, Stephen. And so changing my point of reference to say the and, right? It's not or, it's and. So I would say that's my biggest takeaway, Kelly, and I appreciate Stephen sharing it because it just gives me a fresh perspective to not approach it with there's my way and there's your way. It's how do we come together, right, when we were specifically talking about the relationships versus the results. But it can be applied, obviously, to more things than just that. And going into everything with that mindset of an and relationship, right, to overuse the term, an and thought process, an and way of doing business and getting the results done with the people, right? So that would be my biggest takeaway is the and thought process, if I've coined that.
Awesome. Yeah. You've coined a lot of things today, James. I think the KISJ and the KISS and the if I do it, it's KISS, I guess, with the K at the end. Stephen, you already left us with such inspiring words there, but I wanted to turn it back to you also if you had any final words of wisdom that you wanted to share with James and our audience today.
I would just say simply this, that I'd come back to kind of what is distinctively and uniquely part of being a public service leader. No matter what your role might be within the government, what agency, what department, what organization, there's a distinctiveness to it. It's writ large in those core values. Because the rest, I love the entire public service leadership model. You know, the competencies, becoming self-aware and engaging others and leading change and achieving results. Those 4 competencies are vital. And you know what else? That is a beautiful model that I could also give to people in a private sector business. And I could give them to people, you know, in healthcare and not-for-profit. There's a beautiful Those are beautiful competencies, all 4 of them. What is distinctive about this model for public servants is the core values. And the core values, they're those 2 twin values, 2 sides of the same coin. Stewardship of the public trust, commitment to the public good. That is what makes those 4 competencies sing within a public service setting and come alive in a public service setting. Let's come back to it time and time again. This is who we are. This is our constitution, if you will, our personal constitution as a public service leader. It's in those 2 core values, and they're inseparable, and they're beautifully connected. They're a virtuous upward spiral. If we can model that first, then we can do everything else so much better. It'll be like a lever. It'll be a multiplier for everything else we're trying to do. And an accelerator. We can get good at this. And so I would say that's what we need models of first. And then everything else will follow. And it will demonstrate the character, will demonstrate the competence, and we will help build and bring about a renaissance of trust in our world that we need so much. You're the catalyst as public service leadership leaders. You have unique and distinctive approach to this, which is encompassed in those 2 core values right at the heart, the center of this model. Come back to it time and again. This is your compass as you move forward.
Well, thank you so much for that, Stephen. Thank you to both of you for the insights and the inspiration in this conversation today. I want to thank all of you for joining us in the Public Service Leadership Lab, and to be sure to tune in for our other 2 mentorship conversations later this week on those competencies that Stephen beautifully listed just now. And you can see those wherever you're watching this session now. Make sure to check out our additional resources around the public service leadership model. We have blogs, we have videos, we have case studies, reflection questions, all at our website at ourpublicservice.org under the Public Service Leadership Institute. So a huge thank you again to Stephen and James today for your time, for your expertise. Thank you for your service. And thanks to all of you for joining us.
And thank you, Kelly.
Yes,
and
thank you
too,
so much.
James. Great to be with you.